What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Today is all about the National Women's Soccer League season starting up this weekend. You're on an international break on the men's side. So, I'm going to dedicate the entire show to setting the stage for this NWSL season. As with seemingly every NWSL season, especially last year, one of the beautiful things about this league is its unpredictability, its parity, and the fact you have 12 teams and the margin between team 12 and team 1, or at least team 1 and team 8, 9, 10, is so slim, which makes trying to order these teams incredibly difficult, trying to predict champions incredibly difficult. You saw at the top of the table last season how close the Shield race was, how little there were separating the best teams in this league. And then you have all of this movement in the offseason. And so I'm going to run through my power rankings here to start the show and then spend the second segment talking about kind of storylines and what I'm watching for this season. But this is one of the things that struck me. I have my 12 through 1 to 12 rankings. I also could talk myself into teams 5 through 10 finishing in just about any order, and probably even going to 11. So, it's what makes this league so special is that there just is nothing between most of these teams. Nonetheless, got to do preseason power rankings. So here we go from 12 to 1, starting with the North Carolina Courage. The list of players who left this offseason is extensive and I guess the word is impressive, notable. Dabinia, Mary Mathias, Abby Ursig, Daniel Dornes, Carson Pickett. You do bring in Emily Fox. I'm a huge Emily Fox fan. That's a foundational piece moving forward. Clearly, the Courage are just trying to rebuild. And one of the things I brought up in my 5 things from the week when some of these deals started happening and when the offseason got going was this is not just obviously incredibly important players, one of the best players in the league in Dabinia. This is also kind of your foundation of and the last remaining pieces from this era for the North Carolina Courage. Abby Ursig's your captain. Mary Mathias has been around for a while. Carson Pickett, these have played plenty of NWSL games for this club. And they are all gone. And then you get this unexpected contribution from Diana Ordonez as a rookie. She has the best goal scoring season for a rookie in league history, and she's now gone too. And so I'm going to go through the list of all of these players that you can kind of lean on for the other 11 teams. And the Courage don't really have that outside of Emily Fox. And you traded one of the best left backs in the league in Carson Pickett to get Emily Fox. So it's not even like you upgraded that position significantly. And so I had a lot of difficulty trying to separate some of these teams. This was one of the easier decisions for me is putting the Courage 12th. Like I said, they're clearly trying to kind of regroup, build around youth, and you pay a price for that in this league because the margins are so slim. 11th, Orlando Pride. This is where I could talk myself into moving them a couple spots higher. And I do want to give the Pride credit because considering how the roster ended up last season with Marta's injury and just the way everything went down, they had stretches where they were way better than I expected them to be. There is reason to be optimistic that this is going to be a better season. I've also seen Emily Madrill play in person. If you'd like to see my interview with Emily Madrill, go check the interview section of this YouTube channel. She is the real deal. She is one of those players, and yes, it was at a lower level. Obviously, it's a big step up to go from college, from playing in the USL W League to playing in the NWSL. But it's very obvious when you watch her. She is different. She is on a different level. She has a different kind of control of the game. I think she's going to be not Naomi Girma. That's not what I'm saying. But from a impact and a belonging standpoint, I absolutely see her having a rookie season along the lines of the Sam Coffeys and Naomi Girmas of the world, where you go immediately, she belongs, she's comfortable, she's a pro. So there are some things to get excited about here. Ultimately, you just look top to bottom, and I don't see enough. When you look at the other teams on this list as we get higher up. But last season went better than expected. You got to give him credit for that. That's why I kind of drew the line behind the Pride in terms of teams I could see making the playoffs. They could absolutely make the playoffs. I'm not counting on it at all. But ultimately, to me, it's going to be more about the amount of teams they have to be better than whether they are capable of doing so, if that makes sense. Because you don't just have to win some games, you've got to win more games than a vast majority of this league that has, on paper, better rosters than you still. Number 10 is where things start getting really interesting, and I put the Chicago Red Stars here. Last season, you sneak into the playoffs, even with Mallory Swanson being one of the best players in the league, and I would argue the second most valuable. There were extenuating circumstances in terms of players that weren't there for injuries, pregnancies, all of that. It wasn't the Red Stars roster the way it was supposed to be, and I acknowledge that. This roster is not even last season's roster. And they were barely good enough to get into the playoffs with that roster. And now you have just lost your midfield in free agency. I believe in the core of this team. You still have Alyssa Nair in goal. Tierna Davidson is there, which will be helpful after missing her with, she was one of the players that missed last season with injury. I just don't see enough when I'm looking down the line at the rest of the teams in this league. And like I said, they found a way last season to get there, but they weren't convincing doing so. And now you are trying to completely restructure the most important part of the field. Would I be stunned if all of a sudden with some of the moves they've made and kind of the pieces that are going to fit in there, if they find a way to make it work? No, of course not. This is where I can really start talking myself into all these teams have high ceilings. If it all works, they're all making the playoffs. But you also have to, again, this is what the challenge of this is, and what makes this league so great. You have to pick one to finish 10th. And so it's a question for me of how confident am I in these teams' ability to reach their potential. And my confidence level in the Red Stars just isn't that high, because you've seen what they are with this version of the team carried by Mallory Swanson. You can't ask much more you can't ask for much more from Mallory Swanson. I mean, maybe she wins MVP instead of being an MVP finalist. But it's not like you need more from your star. You need more from the supporting cast. And you lost important pieces of your supporting cast. So I do see a big step back for the Red Stars here. Again, margins are razor thin. But I had to put somebody 10th. And I just feel a little bit better about the rest of the teams than I do the Red Stars. 9th, I have Racing Louisville. This team got better. Abby Erceg, Uchenna Kanu. There's talent to work with here. And obviously, you make the trade, you bring in Carson Pickett, swap her with Emily Fox. Again, can absolutely talk myself into this team making the playoffs. My concern here is just the amount of unproven and unfamiliar pieces that need to fit. This is not a team that has been around each other very long. Obviously, this team hasn't been around very long, and there's been some major overhaul even within that. It's not a situation we'll get to San Diego later where they're basically bringing back their team for year two. That's not the Racing Louisville is still kind of trying to find an identity here. And so on paper, they are absolutely better. They've got a lot of intriguing international talent. Names that aren't the most familiar because they're not, U.S. women's national team players. They didn't come through the college system here in the U.S., but they have an impressive international pedigree. And Uchenna Kanu is one of those players, scoring a lot of goals in Mexico. I just need to see it translate before I completely jump on board with this. That's my hesitation with Racing Louisville. And so I've got them 9th. 8th, Angel City. It appears I'm higher on Angel City than some other people, at least looking at some other power rankings and kind of how people see this league shaking out. It's very simple for Angel City. It's going to come down to the impact of the players who weren't there or who were there very briefly last season who are coming back. Kristen Press, Cindy LaRue, Sarah Gordon. This was supposed to be, Kristen Press's team. This roster was built with her in mind, and then you lost her early into your debut season. And they were still fine without her. They weren't good enough to make the playoffs, but they hung around in the conversation. They weren't terrible. And Cindy LaRue gets brought in to be kind of that stopgap and help cover for the absence of Press, and then she gets injured. And so if you put them all together, there's room for incredible improvement here. Again, talking about ceiling and potential. This Angel City team could be really good. I like what I see on paper. I also need to see it actually work. And what does Kristen Press at this point in her career coming off of that injury look like? Can she be the player anchoring an attack? Can she be the best player on a good team? How much help does she get? You're relying on some big names who are at the later portions of their career coming off of injuries. And then, of course, the other part of this is you also have Alyssa Thompson. But Alyssa Thompson is about the future of this club and finding a face moving forward. Who knows what she's going to contribute right off the bat? It's unfair to expect her to be a complete game changer immediately. I love the pick. I'm all for it. They needed to go get somebody to kind of build this, give this team an identity for the long term. But we're talking about right now. Again, it could go really well. The pieces are there. I just don't think they're going to fit quite well enough to get where Angel City want to this season. And this is kind of where I draw the line in terms of the hierarchy. I feel a lot better about the 7 teams above than I do these ones I've gone through. 7th, I have Gotham. Lynn Williams, Kelly O'Hara, Midge Purse, Yasmin Ryan, Allie Long, Christy Mewes. Most of those players were not there last season. For one reason or another. A couple were. Again, and you go compare that to what I was just talking about with Angel City. This team could be awfully good. You've got goal scorers, you've got defenders, you've got multiple dynamic attackers, you've got players to control midfield. McCall Zaboni's still there too. You have a little bit of everything. And now you're not talking about Midge Purse having to kind of be the sole creative force in the attack. You've got Yasmin Ryan to help. You've got multiple strikers now that you added Lynn Williams. It looks so much better on paper. And I would argue last season's issues weren't totally because of roster construction either. They were disappointing. There has been a concerted effort to make this team better. And it just kind of hasn't happened yet, which again is my concern of why I'm only having them 7th. I need to see this work brilliantly for me to put them into the upper echelon of the league. The 6 teams ahead of them have shown something that gives you a lot of confidence. At some point in the past couple seasons, that Gotham has not even come close to showing. That's why they're 7th. From a roster standpoint, they are better than every other team I've listed so far. You could argue they're better than some of the teams I have ahead of them. But I know what I'm getting from 5 of the 6 teams remaining. I'll explain my thought process on the last one. And you can't say that with Gotham. That's why I have them 7th. 6th, Houston Dash. Very quietly, only 2 teams in the league collected more points than the Houston Dash because you had that whole chaotic, jumbled mess at the top of the table. And the Dash were part of that. Only 2 teams collected more points than they did. And, oh, by the way, Diana Ordonez is coming in. And they kept their key pieces. This is about what they did last season, more so than what they've done in the offseason. Continuity matters. I believe in Ordonez. If there's one thing this team needed, it was a replacement for Rachel Daly. Somebody who is going to be the go-to goal scorer. And Ordonez is perfect for this team in more ways than one. So I really like that pickup. They're only 6th because I have questions about the ceiling. Because you don't see the star power that the rest of these teams I'm about to talk about have. But I know what I'm getting. They showed you this group can win, and they work well collectively. I believe in what they did last season. I believe they'll be back in the playoffs again. Number 5, this might be my really bold take that ends up looking really silly. I have the Washington Spirit 5. No, they're not the same team that won the championship 2 seasons ago. They're not all that far off, though. Defensively, they've lost players. There's no getting around that. But this is still a team with Trinity Rodman, Ashley Hatch, and Ashley Sanchez. And Andy Sullivan. I have a hard time writing that group of players off as just not being able to, no matter who there's, and Aubrey Bledsoe too, by the way. U.S. Women's National Team goalkeeper. Forgot to mention her. I just refuse to write these players off and say that last season is who the Spirit are now. And the other part of this is that and I'm going to talk about this more second half of the show, but all of the off-the-field stuff last season mattered. In terms of just the mental, obviously it was important to make sure the league is a safe place and players are respected. But it also matters in terms of the mental toll it took on teams. I talked about this when the Thorns won. That what shouldn't get lost in all of that is that a team that had to deal with that much nonsense still found a way to go win a championship. You've got to give those players an immense amount of credit for that. One of the things that stood out to me about the E60 was how annoyed, how disgusted, that's probably the better word, the Spirit players in particular who were interviewed for that were. There just seemed to be an incredible amount of tension directed at the organization. And Portland stuff, had happened a while ago, whereas the Spirits is fresher. And so that probably has something to do with it too, right? These are still the players that were interviewed in there are still on this team. That is the kind of thing that absolutely can take you from winning a championship to finishing at the bottom of the table in a league like this. You've got a new coach who knows how this works, and I believe in those players. I will not, I am more than willing to write off last season as an aberration, to attribute it to all of the off the field stuff and just not being in a place mentally to focus the way they would have wanted to for completely understandable reasons. That's not a criticism in the slightest. That focus should be more on the field this season. There should be fewer distractions. I expect the Spirit to bounce back in a big way because of that. Number 4, San Diego Wave. I alluded to this earlier. You throw an expansion team together, you hope it kind of works, and San Diego got it to more than kind of work. Alex Morgan put in her best NWSL season. Naomi Girma is already the best defender in the league. Why FIFA didn't grade her accordingly is beyond me. That was incomprehensibly disrespectful. I guess she has to win MVP, not just be an MVP finalist. I mean, it all worked. And now you get most of that team back. And oh, by the way, Abby Dahlkemper was not available for most of the season. It was really a non-factor. That coach, those players who have already shown you how dangerous they can be and how good they were last season, now, instead of actually trying to figure out how to play with each other for the first time, now they're trying to build off of what they did last season. They know what works. They know what they need to kind of tweak, adjust, whatever it might be. There is a 4 is as far as I was willing to go. Because of what these other 3 teams offer. But if you ask me who the best 4 teams in this league are, no hesitation whatsoever. It is these 4. There is a massive gap. I mean, you could make a case for at least 3 or 4 different teams at the 5 spot. That's where I had a really difficult time ordering people. 1, 2, 3, 4. I knew what I wanted, and I knew the Wave were going to be part of that. Number 3, Kansas City Current. Far and away the winners of the offseason. You get big-time free agents, headlined by Dabinia. You also get Hannah Glass, Swedish international. And Michelle Cooper is coming too. Phenomenal roster construction and roster acquisitions for Kansas City. If you want to put them 1, I have no issue with that. They are right there among the favorites to win the Shield, to win the championship. I have them 3rd because I have a very specific concern. Well, two concerns that kind of relate to each other. One, this is not as good as they are, as impressive as they were at times last season, as amazing as the offseason was. They still don't have a proven high level goal scorer. And you go look at their goal difference last season, it was not impressive. They had some good fortune and just kind of found ways to overachieve and to get more out of games than they probably deserved. And you saw that even in the playoffs against OL Reign. Credit to him for it. And Dabinia is going to help with some of the offensive shortcomings. Which is why I have no issue putting him third. But at some point, you need somebody to put the ball in the back of the net consistently. San Diego Wave have Alex Morgan. Portland Thorns have arguably the best player in the league, reigning MVP, and OL Reign have a whole slew of players. Who is that player for Kansas City? There are options. It could come. But as I sit here right now, without them having played a game, it is not abundantly clear. There is no obvious answer in terms of, I know this player is going to deliver that. That's my concern. And then the second part I mentioned, just the goal difference and the way they won last season. It was a lot of penalties. Things that you can't rely on, that are not a sustainable way of winning at the level you have to win a Shield. That's why I have them third. I love the offseason. I love this roster. I am fascinated to see how they do. There are just some holes I can still poke that I can't poke quite as many in these final two teams. Number 2 is the Portland Thorns. No, I do not believe in immediately putting the defending champions in the top spot. No, the Portland Thorns were not the best team in the league last season. I'll save some of that for number 1. The other reason I have the Thorns 2 is Yasmin Ryan is gone. Janine Becky is done for the season. All of a sudden, you are incredibly thin up front in terms of big-time difference makers. You had a Canadian international who couldn't even get into your starting lineup in Janine Becky. That's how good that front three and their attacking options were. Now you're really reliant on that you're starting front three in a way that you weren't last season, because you had difference makers who could slot in, who could come off the bench, whatever it might be. The depth was part of the story. They don't have that. What they do have is Sophia Smith and Christine Sinclair, and you can keep going down the list. Sam Coffey gets now to come back, having gone through this whole NWSL thing, having been in U.S. women's national team camps. They're excellent. And the point I made after they won, this team is not going anywhere because most of their key players are, under the age of 25. They're only going to get better. But there were some things that went their way last season in terms of the way the playoffs played out, and again, just the roster. They're not as deep. And so you're one injury away from being in some trouble. I wasn't putting them any lower than 2 because I have questions about San Diego Wave's ceiling. I have questions about Kansas City and how this all comes together. You're the defending champions. They were excellent during the regular season too. They've earned the benefit of the doubt from that standpoint for me. But when I'm picking those really small things that are going to give one team an edge over the other, that has stood out to me with the Thorns. Is that the attacking depth that was there last season just does not exist at this point. And then number one, OL Reign. I don't care about what happened in the playoffs. Don't forget this team won the Shield. This team added Emily Sonnet. And don't forget what OL Reign did last season once they got things going. They were rolling. And it's the reality of the playoffs. One strange game, one game where everything goes against you, and you're done. And it's what happened to them. It's why they didn't even make the championship. But that is a different conversation. And I've been harping on this with the Real Madrid-Barcelona discussion on the men's side. And with MLS as well. It's similar to the Philadelphia Union. Just because a team that was really good during the regular season won the championship doesn't mean they were the best team in the league. You can certainly make an argument LAFC were. You can make an argument the Portland Thorns were. But I see what that OL Reign team did. I see the trophy that OL Reign team won as the best team in the league during the regular season. Now, by the thinnest of margins, admittedly. But they did win the Shield. I see them add Emily Sonnet. And you also add to that the fact that they are coming off such a disappointing ending. They're one for me. And this is a power rankings, not necessarily predictions in terms of standings. Because it might take them a little while to get going. That's right. That's what happened last season. And they still got to the Shield. This is most likely to win the title, basically, for me. Most likely to reach the final, however you want to define it. Not necessarily picking regular season success. Because things happen. So I'm looking at this as which team do I feel most confident in? And the answer for me is simple. It's OL Reign. They have everything you can want. That added chip on their shoulder. Not being able to finish the deal last season. Another big-time player added in Emily Sonnet. And just go down the list of the players. They are loaded. They're motivated. So they're number one in my NWSL power rankings.